Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is Rebecca Harbage. I'm the chair of the City Zoning Commission, and this is the September 12th meeting of the City of Helena Zoning Commission. We'll call the meeting to order and reflect that it is 6 p.m. To establish a quorum, for the record, we have 4 zoning commissioners present out of a total of 5, so we do have a quorum. We do not have anybody present in the room, and it sounds like there is one person online. Is that still the case, April?
Yes, we have a member of the city staff, Kyle Holland, Planner 2 online.
Perfect. Thank you. So I think we'll just proceed with our agenda for the evening, which we start with the approval of our August 8th minutes. Those were available online. Does anybody have any changes to the minutes? Right, seeing none, the minutes are adopted as drafted. Thank you, April. Moving on to regular items. First up is a public hearing. We will be hearing a recommendation on amending the city's sign ordinance. And typically, just for the record, how we run through hearings is we will start with a staff presentation. Then we can ask questions of city staff if needed. The city in this case is the applicant. We'll go on to a commission discussion, motion, and hopefully recommendation. Start with you, Michael.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Just to make sure we do have the presentation up online. Okay.
Currently on your title page, just tell me when to advance.
Thank you. So I am Michael Alvarez. I'm a planner with the Community Development Department. And tonight this item is making a recommendation on an ordinance revising the regulation of signs by amending Chapter 23 of Title 11 of the Helena City Code. Next slide, please. The bullet points for this presentation. First off, we'll establish the authority to regulate and make changes to the city code. Then we will talk briefly about the current state of the sign code as it's currently adopted and some of the significant changes that are being proposed with this ordinance. And then we're going to have a brief discussion about material and immaterial changes from the proposed code. So the authority to regulate signs that's applicable to this comes from 2 places. Primarily, it comes from the police powers of municipalities, which is under Title 7 of Montana MCA, Montana Code Annotated. And so specifically, it's 721-4206, control of the erection of signs and awnings. The city or town council has power to regulate the putting up of signs and awnings. There's a specific provision that we'll get to later where the outdoor advertising regulations of the state, our control there is preserved. 75-15-104 of MCA says that nothing in this part shall be construed to abrogate or affect the provisions of any lawful ordinance, regulation, or resolution, which is more restrictive than the provisions of this part. So we can make more restrictive regulations than are provided by the outdoor advertising title of MCA. Next, thank you. The Zoning Commission tonight will be voting for, against, or to table a recommendation to the City Commission that amends Title 11 of the Helena City Code, as previously stated, and specifically, Title 11 of the Helena City Code will be amended by repealing Chapter 23, the general sign regulations, in its entirety, and adopting this new Chapter 23 titled Sign Regulations in lieu thereof. Next, please. So the current state of the code, why are we doing this? Basically, the current sign code poses several issues for the city. One is there was a Supreme Court decision, Reed versus Town of Gilbert, which now requires municipalities to write their sign codes in a completely content neutral format. And there are elements in our sign code as currently adopted that are not content neutral. Our current code handles wall signage on larger buildings in a way that generates frequent applications for variances, which has been a point of concern for some boards. The code is difficult to read. It is non-obvious what sections may pertain to a given sign that somebody wants to erect. The code has outdated references to zone types in administrative areas that are no longer in use. And just quite frankly, the code hasn't been updated since 1997 in a comprehensive way. This is a very good time to evaluate whether or not it still meets the goals and objectives of the city as stated in the growth policy. Next. So the 3 points that I'm going to sort of hone in on in this presentation are where we improved clarity in the signage regulations, with a goal that the users of the sign code should be able to look up information by either zone type or sign type and find all the answers that they need in a much quicker fashion. To increase our conformity, obviously, with recent legal rulings, and also addressed in this section will be, decreasing the need for items to be brought forward to the Board of Adjustment seeking variances. But primarily here, rewriting the code to be completely content neutral, and then to ensure that the current needs of the community are being met. The code having been shaped by the goals and objectives of the 2019 growth policy. Next slide, please. So the new sign ordinance introduces easy to understand tables for permitted and unpermitted sign types and faces by district. This is one of the 3 tables that's up on the screen now. Clearly stating, like we do with land uses, permitted, not permitted, by zone type, and these are grouped in strictly residential, residential sort of office districts, or where more uses are permitted, sort of mixed use districts, and then commercial districts, public lands and institutions, and the airport. All the ones that are here are all on the on-building signage types that are permitted or that are covered or possibly permitted in the city. Whereas another section will just breaks out the freestanding signs and site signage that is possibly permitted by zone type. Next slide. The sign code goes a step further by offering general standards or the design standards by zone type and sign type. Highlighted here is the wall signage one, which I'll get into more specifically a little later on in the presentation. But this is an example of the design standards by zoning district page. So in improving clarity, we needed to eliminate references to administrative areas no longer in use or in conflict with other areas of the code. I put up my favorite section of code because of how many things are wrong with it in just a couple of sentences. But this gives power to the Board of Adjustments that elsewhere in the code they do not have. It makes reference to 4 zone districts that are either defunct or no longer in use. And also just sort of, it goes into expressly prohibited signs that are elsewhere prohibited. So this is the kind of sections that we're trying to eliminate from our current sign code. Next slide. If you can remember back in May, I had already done a presentation, and we've already had conversations about Reed versus Gilbert and some of the challenges that municipalities are facing in the wake of that decision. Um, uh, those materials are still online, and I'm not going to rehash those arguments here tonight since we've already had those conversations with this body. But likely when this presentation goes to the city commission, I will elaborate on this a little bit. It's in our intent statement to that we are looking to provide an equal opportunity for messages to be displayed, and that's our content neutral. That is our content neutral statement. Next, thank you. One of the key changes being made to the sign standards is that signs will scale with building facades in most commercial districts. Moving forward under the proposed codes, architects and designers will be allowed to scale signage up to 3% of each facade. The proposed code further builds on offering flexibility to businesses by aggregating the various on-building signage under the 3% wall signage and allowance. And this will mean that they can choose the types of on-building signage that they want and size it all in a clear and consistent way on the facade. I think this is a real boon to sort of ease of use of the code and reducing the amount of sort of complaints and appeals that we'll see with it. Next slide. The current community needs assessment. So in our growth policy evaluation, we've identified a couple of goals that this new sign code will address. Goal 1, which is to promote and sustain Helena's economic vitality, supporting existing businesses and attracting a diverse range of economic sectors that provide employment opportunities. Goal 10, to plan for and establish types and quantities, of land uses in Helena, supporting community needs, neighborhood centers, aesthetics, and the city's long-term sustainability. Next slide. Essentially here, and with the goals, the city of Helena is seeking to promote business while embracing the uniqueness and natural beauty of Helena's view sheds and historic assets. So, and with the objectives, we're working to preserve or mitigate potential loss of historic, cultural, or aesthetically significant features, boosting overall economic vitality, tourism, and local quality of life, including landscapes and open space areas, skylines, sightlines, and view sheds on the city's south border, buildings, districts, or objects of historic significance. We're here to support land use patterns that promote compatible, well-designed development, foster the long-term fiscal health of the community, maintain and enhance resident quality of life, implement related master plans and/or facility plans, and Objective 85, reduce functional and visual impacts of entry corridors and commercial development on abutting residential neighborhoods, considering buffering uses, design standards, and other methods. I apologize, I was going to focus on just portions of those and I just read it. Next slide. One of the major changes is going to be the sunsetting of billboards. The proposed sign codes will sunset off-premise signs, including billboards in the city of Helena after 10 years. The statement up here is reflective of the goals and objectives that I just read. Next slide. Another major change to this is new sign lighting standards. Currently, the city's lighting ordinance doesn't cover signs. There's one statement that basically just says that by reason of brilliance, and we've kept this statement in, but we've just added to it. By reason of brilliance, they can't bother their neighbors and by shining directly onto them. So we've I think strengthened we've created and strengthened our ability to regulate sign lighting with this new code. And then next slide. The code as presented has some changes that have been highlighted either by city staff or city attorneys that we would like to sort of address here. So these would be material changes and would need to be either made, the changes to adopt these would need to be made in the motion language, or the item can be tabled and reworked and brought back. But these are some of the identified issues. One would be amending section 1123 1D1E to clarify 60 calendar days. That's probably the most immaterial one on here. 1123 1H to include language that sunsets billboards annexed into the city. A little bit of a just a gap in coverage that we sunset current ones. There is a way to handle it without it being in the chapter. We can make it a condition of annexation each time, but it's probably a little bit cleaner to have it as a policy in the code. Amending 1123 4A4 to remove language about the menu boards, which has been identified as not being content neutral. The rest of that statement can stand, but that second sentence calling out menu board specifically is at issue. Amending 1123 4A4. Nope, sorry, that is amending the wrong portion. Adding an amendment. This is what this is supposed to say. To allow for temporary signs. Somewhere along the way, they were fully axed from this code. So a real estate sign or other temporary commercial sign would be required to get a permit as it stands now. If that's okay with you, if that's the recommendation you'd like to bring forward, you don't need to change this. But in talking with legal, they certainly could be limited to a particular size and or expressing a specific date range that must be then made visible to the public and not exceeding some agreed upon amount of time. That way that there's some workaround for temporary signs, which currently doesn't exist. Every sign would need to be permitted as it stands now. And then amending 1123 8E to clarify that the sign owner is financially responsible for the costs incurred with removal of a sign. City's attorney has advised me that the language there is unclear or weak on that front. Yes, next slide. Although one last note, fairly clean for a city attorney review of an entire chapter. That is the extent of the comments.
I say yes.
On that, for the love, on that last item, responsible for the costs incurred with the removal of a sign. So is any sign that is not allowed. If temporary signs were allowed, that would be a temporary sign, or would that be a billboard when they're sunsetted in 10 years?
Thank you, Chair and Commission. So 1123 8E is in the removal of signs section. So this is basic. So this only applies to a sign that has been ordered removed by the jurisdiction. And one that they have already not removed, and the city is taking action by removing the sign itself. We're saying that we will put those fees onto the sign owner, whatever whatever costs were incurred in the removal of it.
It's like when you get your car impounded, you have to deal with that and you're in charge of the responsibility of the fee.
Right.
Deal.
Yeah. So, once somebody has already, been court ordered to have the sign removed, this is just ensuring that they understand that we're not offering a free removal service.
Also have a question. Were temporary signs dealt with, or I guess are temporary signs dealt with in the current sign ordinance, not what we're looking at tonight?
Temporary, thank you, Chair and Commission. Temporary signs are dealt with in, the current code, but not in a content neutral fashion. And there's basically no language except for maybe the definition of temporary sign that we are able to use again.
Okay. Thanks.
Uh, From the working sessions, if I can elaborate a little bit, the original framework that we were working on, the post-read drafts from Thomas, that were created and had retrieved from Thomas. They had a fairly elaborate structure for dealing with temporary signs, and a number of blank spaces to be filled in by the zoning commission or city commission for each zone type, in regards to size and number of and length of time per zoning district. It was a fairly substantial section. That originally got replaced by the 30-day 6 square foot section. And those were both sort of placeholder numbers. And then that got sort of workshopped internally to death by city staff, and it apparently it wasn't replaced. Yeah, that's
Okay.
about the summary.
Kind of related but unrelated question. Signage is still a condition of approval for occupancy of a building. Is that correct?
Not the signs that we regulate. So we don't regulate things like exit signs, handicap parking signs, or anything like that isn't covered by this chapter. You do not need to put the name of your company on the side of a building to get your certificate of occupancy.
From that perspective, I don't think temporary signs should be allowed. In my opinion, the only reason I think you'd need a temporary sign is because you're trying to orient someone to a place that doesn't have a sign yet. But you should just get the actual sign instead of having it. Temporary signs are, or if it's a condition of approval for the building to be occupied. Could be a reason. My problem is then temporary signs remain forever and it's an enforcement issue at that point. I don't know if we're to the discussion part of this conversation. Sorry.
So I guess my understanding of the definition of a temporary sign is broader than that, to include like a for sale sign.
That's fair. You mentioned the real estate sign specifically. Okay.
I have many more examples.
Do you want to continue with your presentation? And then we'll see what questions.
Would
we
you
want to
like, would you
come
like
back
the
to.
next, would you like the next slide now?
Please. So I'd like to address timeline and public engagement here. So at the recommendation of the city attorney's office, the community development department will seek further public input between a vote to recommend approval and taking the ordinance before city commission. That public comment will not be evaluated by city staff and will be brought forward with the proposed ordinance to city commission, likely in November. We have a few items going on, and we'd like to give this some space to be evaluated in that commission meeting when it does occur. Typically, when we get a recommendation from the zoning commission, we schedule the city commission the following month. Here we'd be holding on to it as a delay. We'd be seeking and gathering more public engagement and then bringing all of that together to the city commission. If you are to, I'll skip ahead to table. We could, and this says back before the commission in October, we'd probably be bringing it back to you actually in November, not October, if you vote to table. I would ask that it be brought back, I think it's November 14th as the second Tuesday meeting. The reason being, we could then do public engagement prior to your next meeting. There has been some hemming and hawing about how to go about public engagement. The city is in the process of adopting a new public engagement participation plan. We have that builds upon the formerly adopted IAP2 standards, and then finding the correct corresponding level of engagement and then proceeding with that.
Can I
and then,
ask a clarifying question on that?
yes,
So just to make sure that I'm following. If we recommend approval tonight, the city will schedule additional public input opportunities prior to taking this to the city commission for a vote. If we vote to table tonight, that would allow for that same public input opportunity to happen before our next hearing.
correct. As well as workshopping some of the items that are
still
that we
need to
have
be-
noticed in the previous slide.
And that could be done for the November hearing, zoning commission.
Yes.
Thank you. That's my clarification.
And then just to close the loop on it, a vote to not recommend approval, we probably won't revisit signs until 2026. We have a lot of things on our agenda, and this would go to the bottom of the list. 2026, and I would say that's at the earliest.
No big deal.
There's a lot going on. Last slide.
I'll be dead.
And so staff recommends tabling the item, and you should have the November 14th date on there. Cool, because mine's old and has the wrong date. Meeting date. So the noted items of material change and any other items of material change that the zoning commissioners may have be included in the proposed ordinance. And obviously for a chance, if so desired, to have public engagement occur before voting on it. And then motion language is vote to table a recommendation on an ordinance revising the regulation of signs by amending chapter 23 of title 11 of the Helena City Code. And on a personal note, I apologize for not coming here tonight with a recommendation of approval.
Other questions for staff?
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's clear. The 2026 thing is in my head a little. If we table today, will we have a work session in between today and November to work out I'd say my biggest concern, the discussion point, is the temporary sign piece that was excluded. Will we have a time to talk about that? Or will changes be made and then they'll be proposed and then we'll be asked to make a recommendation at that point?
Thank you, Chair and Commission. Yeah, the availability is up to the zoning commission. We are going to be throwing more stuff at you in October's meeting, is my understanding. We're already booking you up quite a bit. So it is it is up to the commission whether or not I am available evenings. I work till 6 anyway.
And just to note, following up on the email that I sent you all recently, there's also a lot of time sensitive items related to the SB 382 implementation that are coming up. And Director Brink wanted to make sure you would be available for at least the October and November dates. So possibly December as well. So we will have a lot coming at you this fall.
And to clarify, are those requests for work session and hearing or just the hearing?
To my knowledge, it's just for the hearing. He didn't specify because we also have things going forward to the planning board as well. So just kind of a make sure we have quorums available for all of these meetings kind of thing.
Other thoughts, questions from this side of the room?
Statement. I think personally, talking about a pretty scoped sign issue for temporary signs. I think we could probably knock that out pretty quick in a brief meeting before a meeting if we need to, or we could clump together with other things you guys want us to work on. And I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, I think the only thing that would make that clarification better is if there was like something put to what regulation would be around temporary sign, so that it would make it, and even if that's the proposed change without a work session that comes to the next recommendation, if I'm saying all those words correctly, at least it would give us something to discuss and potentially change in our motion, because then we'd have like something to kind of say, no, I think it should be 8 square feet. Yeah, total example, right? I think that may alleviate my concern, and maybe we don't need to have a work session at all. But otherwise we're just like coming up with something for the motion. April, could you go back to
Chair
that
and
slide?
Commission.
Was it-
So what I can say is what city staff is going to propose is that it's something in the exempt sign section. And then it's strictly a size and a way to present and public facing information about the time frame that the sign is going to be up there. Needs to be not necessarily included on the sign face, but needs to be obvious to people walking by. It would be a change, for instance, for people that are doing a real estate sign. They'll need to adopt their signs to perhaps have like an erasable section for changing the dates on the signs or what have you. We'd probably want to specify that they can't be anchored to the ground in a permanent way to avoid creating a loophole where somebody is using temporary signage and just changing the dates. You'd certainly want to not allow electronic faces on them that could auto update that information, that kind of thing. But it's just it'd be a little chunk in the exempt section.
Can I ask a question? So on this slide with the changes recommended from city staff, those aren't the same as the changes recommended by the Board of Adjustment comments. So are we going to, if we table this, would we be incorporating some of Board of Adjustment suggestions in a work session or a hearing? Or I guess how would we deal with those?
To clarify, are you referencing the comments that we received by email or the letter tonight?
The ones by email from a couple weeks
Okay.
ago, I think.
My perception that those comments were mostly, for the most part, were just their observations more than anything material that needed to be changed. But trying to remember if there was anything in particular. I'll pull them up real quick.
Chair and Commission, you just need to acknowledge that they've been read prior to making your judgment. It's completely up to the commission about whether or not to incorporate any of those changes.
Sure, and I understand that. It's just we haven't really brought those up yet, so I don't know if there's something that's worth workshopping into the new, or I guess the revised draft for next time, or if we need to have, I guess, amendments prepared for the hearing if we want to make those then.
I will say my preference is that we not be making decisions kind of on the fly with unknown language that may or may not be incorporated. And if we are going to have another work session to address some of the items, the material changes that were brought to us by staff tonight, that it also include a discussion of the comments we've received to date, since we have already received them. I don't think that it would need to include discussion of additional public input opportunities, since we're unknown. That timing is unknown, how it would compare to our work session. But of course, we would incorporate or consider any public comment received before our next hearing. And that, as a maybe final, I'm not gonna promise, another comment on this. I know we've had a handful of work sessions talking about the sign ordinance. I think going back to March, I think, Michael, you laid out the need for this work fairly well. And it is something that a previous zoning commission has attempted to take through across the finish line. I think back in 2014 or 15. So I think that this work needs to be done. I am not of the opinion that it can or should wait until 2026 or later. And I guess my last comment would be that it feels a bit like we were rushed to bring this to a hearing in September. And it seems now that it was really not ready to come before us this month, which is unfortunate. But I would rather be making a vote on and a recommendation on something that is fully thought out. That's my thoughts. Okay. Gonna ask for public comment. Yeah, is there, April, is there anyone else online?
No, it's just Kyle.
Okay. And reflecting for the record that we do not have any members of the public in the chamber tonight. I don't think there is any public comment. Is there further discussion or questions from the commission? Or is there a motion and we can discuss a motion?
I'll make a motion. I vote to table a recommendation on an ordinance revising the regulation of signs by amending chapter 23 of title 11 of the Helena City Code.
Seconded.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion?
I'll follow up first. I really didn't want to do that. I really wanted to be able to recommend a motion. And I really don't want this to be pushed to 2026. So whatever we can do to get this done. I don't understand what's in SB 382 that's pushing this work, but I think as a board want to make a priority to get this done.
I'll add, we've put a lot of work into this. We're gonna get it done. So, we see you guys a few more times on it.
Further discussion on the motion? All right. All those in favor of the motion to table the recommendation for tonight, say aye.
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 Hi.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We are recommending we table this tonight. Thanks, guys. Okay, that's the end of our hearing on the sign ordinance. We'll move up down the agenda. Next up is old business. There is nothing on the agenda for old business. There's also nothing on the agenda under new business. I want to reflect again for the record that we do not have any members of the public in the chamber tonight. And I'll double check again with April. It looks like there is still no one from the public online. So we will jump past public comment opportunities to member communications and proposals for our next agenda. It sounds as though we need to pick a date for a work session. And I guess I have a question for staff around the public input. When I know you mentioned that you're still trying to iron out how that will work. Do you have any sense of when that might happen? This month or next month?
So a press release has been drafted and then it was pulled back. The press release is ready to go. And time-wise, I suppose we'd be shooting for like 2 weeks from now to hold a 3 different sessions essentially where I'm available to the public, a morning and afternoon, evening session. It was sort of open house style to take public comment or to collect written comment and just primarily since legal ads and the actual sessions have not driven any public comment, hopefully off of a press release.
You said 2 weeks to issue the press release or 2 weeks to collect the public comment?
I'm sorry, hold the open house sessions in 2 weeks.
Great.
Yeah. With the press release having been gone out prior.
What other parameters do we have around targeting a work session date?
We are going to be stacked next month for evening meetings on Tuesdays. Board of Adjustment on the 3rd has 5 items going before it. So that really can't be moved around. Legal ad has already been placed. You all are meeting on the 10th, and we have a couple of code updates that have been driven by SB, not SB, but have been driven by recent legislation. We also have a pre-zone coming before you all for city park properties that are not currently in the city. Little problematic for us. And then planning board on the 17th is hearing updates to subdivision regulations in city code, also driven by recent legislation. So October is kind of packed as far as evening meetings. So you could hold your traditional pre-meeting work session. But if you want to stick to a Tuesday, the only option would be the 24th outside of that window.
And so remind me also, please, if we are targeting bringing this back to a hearing on November 14th, when does everything need to be wrapped up for public noticing?
So let me pull up my calendar, just a second here. Because if we, yeah, the 14th, if we're targeting the 14th, ideally we would want to be wrapped up that last full week of October. Ideally.
So a question for you, Michael, around how much discussion you believe there will need to be to deal with the material changes being made and then anything that comes out of additional comments we've received. Is that something where you will make the changes and bring a new draft to us and we could just look at it and say thumbs up or thumbs down in an hour, or are we going to need to have a full discussion?
No, I will be providing new language that you can then debate.
So if we look at 5 to 6 on October 10th before our hearing, is that
The-
doable for you also?
My only concern is if you all have your own changes that you would have needed to have brought also tonight, I guess. If you already have some in mind that you would have done as an amending language. If you don't, an hour is probably fine. If, for instance, you wanted to go through and debate the Board of Adjustments comments or other sources of public comment that may come in between now and then, you know, you can quickly eat up an hour.
I have a few editorial comments just based on the latest draft and previous notes that I had taken, but I don't think that those need to be debated. I could send that to you so you could incorporate it in a red line version. Other than that, would it be,
Couldn't you technically do the same for the, again, trying to not debate, but just kind of direct? There are like some, like there's, some specific questions from the public that's like clarification of the language. They're like talking about roof parapet and, is it top of finished floor or this or that? I think my only thing would just be like making sure that it's clear, which you probably have already done, or we could do beforehand. Not debating their comments, just making sure they're like accounted for, I guess.
Right. So we have established policy about how we handle parapets, which is written somewhere upstairs, and I won't just quote for you presently, but so yeah, I guess that means we have some language, and it doesn't need to be handled as policy, and we can incorporate that clarifying language. Yeah.
does that sound reasonable to folks?
Yeah, I think we just have to do it in the hour.
Fast.
If you have any comments, anything written, you can provide it ahead of time and I can have those edits out, incorporate them. I don't want to be I can draft material changes for you, but immaterial changes, if you see spelling or anything like that, I'm happy to just do, but, yeah, material changes are a little different.
I guess I would ask my fellow commissioners that if you review the comments that we've received already and you have suggestions on how those should be addressed or incorporated, if you could write that up as a recommendation and send it to Michael and April in advance of our October 10th work session, that would be helpful.
Please keep in mind that those emails would probably, will need to be,
Part of the
made
record.
available to the public as meeting materials.
Okay. I think that is good for me as far as proposals for the next agenda. Anything else, others?
Well, just to be clear, we agreed to a work session from 5 to 6 on October 10th, just so the record sits.
Yep.
In which case we'll decide all those things so that we can go to a hearing on November 14th and hopefully make a recommendation to approve.
Correct.
Great.
Okay. Meetings of interest and announcements. Our next meeting is a work session from 5 to 6 on October 10th, followed by a hearing at 6 p.m. on October 10th. Anything else as far as announcements? All right. We've reached the end of the agenda. We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.